All right, let's dive right into this explainer and look at how our brain's evolutionary shortcuts are secretly sabotaging our most critical decisions. The human brain is an absolutely incredible, highly evolved machine, but when you take this ancient survival engine and drop it into our modern, high-stress, data-heavy world, well, things start to misfire. We're going to explore what researchers call cognitive black holes. These are systematic blind spots that don't just trip us up personally, but can literally bring down billion-dollar empires.
But before we map out all these flaws, I want you to ask yourself this classic World War II bomber question. Imagine you're a military engineer. Your planes are returning from battle and they're just covered in bullet holes, mostly on the wings and the tail. Now, you only have a limited amount of heavy armor you can add to protect them. So do you put that armor where the bullet holes are? Really think about it for a second. Because the intuitive answer here, it's a deadly trap. We'll come back to the answer in just a minute.
So, here's our roadmap. We'll cover the birth of these black holes, group the 4 core traps, look at some massive decision disasters, tackle the brand new tech biases, and then finally, learn how to outsmart our own biology with organizational debiasing.
Starting with Section 1, the birth of cognitive black holes. We really need to normalize these errors first. Falling into a cognitive trap doesn't mean you're stupid. It's actually the sign of a highly evolved mind just trying to conserve energy.
The big takeaway from decision science is this: cognitive biases are predictable. They're non-random. Our brains hit physiological limits when trying to process tons of highly uncertain information, so they take shortcuts. Now, on an individual level, these shortcuts might just cause a minor goof, but scale that up to a corporate or strategic level, boom. They create massive, invisible blind spots, the cognitive black holes that just swallow logic whole. Move into Section 2, 4 core traps. Let's take all 50 of these complex academic biases and organize them into a framework that actually makes sense for our day-to-day lives.
Basically, these traps fall into 4 main buckets. First, you've got social and interpersonal. This is where the halo effect lives, making us trust a coworker's competence just because they've got a great smile. Second is decision and risk. This is home to the IKEA effect, which is why we totally overvalue a mediocre project just because we built it ourselves. Third is information and belief, where our brain literally filters out hard facts just to protect our pre-existing opinions. And lastly, memory and perception, where your brain actually alters your recollection of the past. These 4 categories are pulling the strings on our daily irrationalities.
Section 3, decision disasters and systemic fermentation. Okay, so what happens when these biases multiply? There's this massive myth that if you put a bunch of biased people in a room, their biases will somehow cancel each other out. The terrifying truth? They don't. They multiply exponentially.
Which brings us right back to our WWI bomber hook. The military looked at those returning planes and intuitively thought, armor the wings, that's where the bullet holes are. But statistician Abraham Wald stepped in and realized they were stuck in a massive cognitive black hole known as survivorship bias. He pointed out they were only looking at the planes that survived. Actually, scratch that, the real insight was realizing the untouched engines were the fatal spots. Why? Because the planes hit in the engines never made it back to be counted in the first place. By armoring the untouched areas, Wald saved countless lives. It just goes to show how your gut intuition can be completely backwards.
And that leads perfectly into our next trap, the sunk cost death spiral. Here's how it plays out. You make an initial decision, the market shifts, and you start bleeding money. But instead of pivoting, your brain triggers loss aversion, because losing feels twice as bad as winning feels good. So, to save face, you double down. This exact spiral is why the British and French wasted billions keeping the Concorde jet flying way past the point of no return. It's also exactly how Kodak's executives, who were so terrified of cannibalizing their film factories, totally refused to pivot to digital, leading to a spectacular bankruptcy.
Now, when you mix these personal biases with group dynamics, you get groupthink and blind obedience, and the results are catastrophic. Think about the 1986 Challenger disaster. The engineers knew the cold compromised the O-rings, but under insane pressure to launch, management suppressed that data to keep up a false consensus. Or look at the Theranos fraud. Elizabeth Holmes heavily leveraged the halo effect, wearing the Steve Jobs turtlenecks, recruiting a board full of powerful politicians and generals. The sheer weight of authority bias silenced the dissenting scientists and kept a billion-dollar lie alive for years.
Let's pivot to Section 4, new biases in modern tech. We're going to look at how our screens are creating totally new, insidious traps our ancestors never even had to think about.
We're facing two huge modern traps today. First up is automation bias. We are so conditioned by Netflix and Spotify telling us what to consume that we're basically surrendering our human curiosity to the algorithm. In the business world, this looks like blindly trusting an AI analytics report even when your gut tells you the market is shifting. Then we have the Google effect, or digital amnesia. Studies show that if your brain knows it can just Google something later, it flat out refuses to encode it into your deep memory. We feel like geniuses because we have the internet in our pockets, but our actual internalized knowledge is just fading away.
And what happens when this modern environment throws us into an acute crisis? Well, we experience tachypsychia, or time distortion. Under extreme stress, you get a massive spike of dopamine and noradrenaline. This survival response triggers tunnel vision, where you miss huge peripheral details, and auditory exclusion, meaning you literally won't hear alarms going off. Worst of all, it causes memory reconstruction defects. After a crisis, your brain absolutely hates empty gaps in its timeline, so it will fabricate false memories just to connect the dots. You'll swear under oath that something happened, even when the security footage proves it didn't. Crazy, right?
Okay, so if our brains are fundamentally wired to trick us, how do we stand a chance? That brings us to Section 5, organizational debiasing and double-loop learning. Since we can't just willpower our way to being rational, we have to build robust systems to outsmart our own biology. The absolute gold standard for this is Harvard professor Chris Argyris's double-loop learning. Think of single-loop learning like a thermostat. If it drops below 20 degrees, the heat kicks on. It changes an action based on an existing rule. But double-loop learning? That is a structural fix. A double-loop thermostat stops and asks, wait a minute, why is the rule 20 degrees in the first place? Is that even the right baseline? Instead of just fixing a quick error, double-loop learning demands the courage to question the very assumptions and mental models that your whole strategy is built on.
The problem is, humans really hate being wrong. To get past our natural defensiveness, teams need a strict three-step process. First, observe. You have to intentionally separate the raw data from your brain's subjective spin on it. Second, dialogue. You have to expose the hidden shadow narrative, cut through the polite corporate PR and talk openly about what people are actually whispering about at the water cooler. And third, experiment. Don't bet the farm. Run tiny, low-cost micro-experiments to quickly test new assumptions and shatter the comfort of the status quo. To pull this off, you can instantly grab tools from the debiasing toolbox. Try running a pre-mortem. Before you launch, look at your team and say, okay, it's 5 years from now. This project was a total disaster. Write down exactly why. It gives everyone the psychological safety to point out the red flags without looking like a buzzkill. You can also use a DTR form to balance out negative assumptions with cold, hard evidence. Or officially assign a devil's advocate. Make it someone's literal job to aggressively hunt for blind spots and force dissent. I'm going to leave you with the 50th, and honestly the absolute most dangerous trap of the whole shebang, the bias blind spot. This is that deeply arrogant yet totally natural belief that yes, cognitive biases are real, but everyone else is affected by them, except for you. The exact second you start believing your mind is immune to these black holes, well, you've already been swallowed by one. So the next time you are 100% certain you're making the completely rational choice, take a step back and ask yourself, am I armoring the bullet holes or am I looking for the missing data? Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and I'll catch you next time.